Hey guys, so today we are continuing the History, Flaws, and Cancelled series with a vehicle that I see being requested all the time, the Dodge Stealth. If you're new to these types of videos, the first part focuses on looking back at the history of the car and all the details and specs, and then we jump to talking about the events that led to the car being cancelled and any flaws that it had. Make sure to check out my other episodes as I'm making my way through many of the Mopar cars. We've already done the Dodge Avenger, Dart, Caliber, Magnum, Nitro, some Chryslers like the 200 Sebring and Aspen, and some Jeeps as well. The Stealth was an interesting collaboration with just 6 model years from 1991 to 1996. So let's begin back in 1989. At the 1989 Tokyo Motor Show, Mitsubishi unveiled their new GTO Sports Coupe to compete with the likes of the Mazda Cosmo, Nissan 300ZX, Subaru SVX, and the Toyota Supra. With this GTO, Mitsubishi would have a new flagship vehicle for the next decade. However, the executives of the company were concerned that the GTO would clash with other prominent vehicles like the Pontiac GTO in North America and the Ferrari 250 GTO globally, since they shared the same name, so they decided the name should not be used outside of Japan. Enter the Mitsubishi 3000 GT for the US and Canada, and that's basically what the Dodge Stealth is, mechanically identical, just wearing a disguise to try to fool you into thinking that it was American and not Japanese. To understand the Stealth, we need to look at the partnership between Mitsubishi and Chrysler. We won't go into too much detail here, as I kind of want to make an entire video on that partnership, but if we head back into the 1970s, we do see the big American manufacturers partnering up with the automakers from across the globe. Everyone had a partner to dance with: GM and Toyota, Ford and Mazda, and Chrysler and Mitsubishi. The goal here was for the Americans to try to learn how to improve the quality of their vehicles, while the Japanese could increase their footprint in the US and sell more vehicles there. So this relationship began in the early 1970s and went on for decades, with badge engineering and tons of jointly produced cars. Chrysler had the specific need of good small cars and wanting to expand globally, while Mitsubishi wanted to make a profit. Chrysler even owned 15% of Mitsubishi Motors in 1981. It was definitely a rocky relationship, as you might expect, but that relationship created the vehicle for today's episode. So enough about Mitsubishi, let's move back to the Dodge Stealth. So the Stealth was a front-engine 2+2 hatchback sports coupe and grand touring car with either front-wheel drive or all-wheel drive. The platform used was also shared with the Mitsubishi Eclipse and Eagle Talon with the exact same wheelbase, but the Stealth and 3000 GT were 10 inches longer and 6 inches wider. Chrysler officially stated that, quote, "The Stealth's design is the result of the collaborative effort between Chrysler and its Japanese partner Mitsubishi Motors Corp." End quote. So Chrysler did influence the styling and bodywork, but not the engineering, as all of these were made in Nagoya, Japan, and it was mechanically identical to the Mitsubishi 3000 GT, as I've said. Chrysler was aiming for this to be a high-performance sports car that could compete with vehicles such as the Chevy Corvette, Mazda RX-7, and the Toyota Supra, and it gave Dodge a new flagship performance vehicle. For the first model year in 1991, there were 4 trim levels available: Base, ES, RT, and RT Turbo. The base started at $18,438, and as the technology and performance increased, so did the prices, all the way to $29,860 for the RT Turbo. 1993 was the last year for the ES model, so from then on there were just 3 trim levels. Prices were up each year, so by 1994 it would cost almost $38,000 for the RT Turbo. If we look at inflation in today's US dollars, this was not a cheap vehicle, as you were well into the $50,000 to $60,000 range for the Turbo model. Now if we take a look at the design, the Stealth was very sleek and gave off the appearance that this had some performance to it. The body was quite aerodynamic, with sculpted air dams on the side, rear spoiler standard, and a very small crosshair grille on the front fascia, something that Dodge of course would become well known for on many other vehicles. For cooling, the front end of the RT Turbo had air dam intakes for the radiator and intercooler. A few cool features were pop-up headlights and blister caps on the hood for the ESC controllers on top of the strut towers. One thing that was lacking here was the active aerodynamics, as the Mitsubishi versions had automatically adjusting front and rear spoilers not found on the Stealth. Moving on inside, as you might expect on a coupe, the Stealth had a cockpit design but was rather claustrophobic. The dashboard wrapped around to the passenger side, and the seats were decently bolstered with good side supports in either cloth or leather depending on the models. The RT and Up models had automatic air conditioning and a more premium stereo, with tweeters in the dashboard, 6-inch speakers in the doors, and 6x9 speakers in the back. Of course, due to the nature of the vehicle, it wasn't too easy to get in or out, and it had next to no space for the rear passengers or cargo room, but that wasn't really the point of this thing anyways. Now we shift over to performance. The engine was set up in 3 different states of tune with varying horsepower levels. The base model got the 3-liter single overhead cam 12-valve V6 with 164 horsepower and 185 pound-feet of torque. The ES&RT got the same thing with a dual overhead cam and 24 valves, increasing the output to 222 horsepower and 201 pound-feet of torque. At the top, the RT Turbo would get a turbocharged version with 300 horsepower and 307 pound-feet of torque, and that's the performance model that everyone talks about. Unlike the other models, the Turbo had a permanently engaged 4-wheel drive and 4-wheel steering, which is a nice feature that turns the rear wheels the same direction as the front wheels at speeds over 30 miles per hour. For the 2 lesser engines, a 5-speed manual was standard and a 4-speed automatic was optional. A few notes for the RT Turbo. In 1994, there was a gain in power as the output was boosted up by 20 horsepower to 320 and up by 8 pound-feet of torque to 315. The 5-speed manual was also changed into a 6-speed, and there was no automatic offered. The all-wheel drive system had a 45-55 front-rear torque split and limited slip differential. The posted performance times are shown on screen, with the updated RT Turbo able to hit 0 to 60 in just 5.3 seconds, quarter mile in 13.5 seconds, and hit a top speed of 152 miles per hour. Pretty remarkable for the 1990s, and still great in terms of today's standards. It can easily keep up with a 5.7 Hemi. Not bad considering that the curb weight was still hefty as well, over 3,800 pounds fully loaded. Stealth had 4-wheel independent suspension with 4-wheel tow control, extra wide tracks, a dual isolation system, and a sway bar on the secondary crossmember. The rear had a self-aligning tow and dual wishbone and trailing arm design. There was also electronic control, optional on any model above the base. That controller would monitor the steering, speed, brake, throttle, and G-force data to control the shock absorbers, giving you tour or sport settings. This is a pretty awesome feature that a lot of cars today still don't even have. As for the brakes, all the models below the Turbo got very decent 2-piston front calipers with huge 15-inch rotors up front and 14 in the rear. The Turbo improved that with impressive 4-piston front calipers with huge 16-inch front discs and 15 in the back with anti-lock brakes. The tire sizes and rims slowly went up with each model, 205 65 15 on the base, 225 55 16 on the ES and RT, and 245 45 17 on the Turbo. Now, before we look at the Cancellation, I want to quickly go over some other features and updates. Standard features on all models included dual airbags, a rear window defroster, spoiler, power outside rearview mirrors, AM/FM cassette stereo system, and a leather-wrapped tilt steering wheel. As for the various changes over the years, I'll display everything more in depth on screen, but 1992 got an optional sunroof, 1993 saw many new features get added to the ES and RT. 1994 brought more power to the RT Turbo, as we talked about, up 20 horses and 8 pound-feet of torque, along with new projector headlights and fog lights, and an upgrade to the sound system, and the ES trim level was dropped. Finally, 1996 saw a new rear spoiler, and 18-inch chrome wheels were available for the first time, the largest size yet. As for one interesting fact, Dodge tried to bring the Stealth on board as a pace car at the 1991 Indianapolis 500, but there was plenty of resistance from the United Auto Workers Union because the Stealth was Japanese-built and not American. So it was shunned, and a pre-production Viper took over, but not before there were a few pace models made anyways, decal and all, as you can see on screen. In late September of 1995, Chrysler Corporation confirmed their plans to drop the Stealth after the 1996 model year, and that was the end of the coupe. So that'll bring us to the next part of the video, looking at the reasoning for the Cancellation and the flaws of the Stealth. I've come up with 6 different reasons and or flaws that refer to the car or Chrysler decisions. So let's have a look. First big factor was that Chrysler wanted to start distancing themselves from the Mitsubishi brand. Chrysler had heavily relied on the Japanese automaker in the mid-1980s to add some small sporty cars and pickups to their aging model lineups, and in fact, in 1985, they imported twice as many Mitsubishi-made vehicles from Japan as Mitsubishi themselves did. But over time, that reliance decreased as Chrysler worked to update their product line with their own vehicles. Chrysler spokesman Mike Rosano talked about that, saying, quote, "We basically feel we can produce products within the Chrysler system that fill the lineup out and fit the Dodge brand mentality without producing the Stealth," end quote. So Chrysler no longer needed that image boost that it provided them, and without the Stealth, Chrysler was only importing the Eagle Summit from Japan and nothing else. Reason number 2, Dodge also didn't need to use the Stealth as their flagship sports vehicle once the Viper was released in 1992. This was a more exotic, more powerful, and better performing car, and Dodge no longer needed the Stealth name to carry any weight. Dodge General Manager Martin Levine said, quote, "Viper is our brand icon. Viper is desperately needed, even if it just sits on the lot," end quote. So Viper in, Stealth out. Another important factor is that the Stealth sold very poorly throughout its entire lifetime, and if it wasn't making Chrysler money, then it's only a matter of time before they pull the plug. Some of the other reasons we'll look at why it sold so poorly, but I was surprised to see just how bad it was. For the 6 model years, starting with 1991 and ending with 1996, the total sales were 65,474 cars moved, with a peak of 18,352 in 1991. That's just way too low, even for more of a niche segment, and it had to go. One major reason for the slow sales was that the Stealth was constantly overlooked, and it never got the attention of some of the other Japanese vehicles of this era. When you think of 1990s sports cars, you probably don't think of the Stealth right away. The Dodge name reminds you of muscle and Hemis, not of all-wheel drive turbocharged coupes. Tuners and enthusiasts went crazy for the likes of the Mazda RX-7, Nissan 300ZX, Toyota Supra and MR2, Acura NSX, and Mitsubishi Eclipse. Those names carry huge value and are members of an iconic era. Even though the Stealth tried its best to fit in, it had the high tech, it had the 2 turbos on the V6 engine, and it had the all-wheel drive, it still quietly slipped under the radar. Part of this was because it was never truly better than what the other competitors were offering. With a weight of over 3,500 pounds, it was too heavy to be as nimble as something like a mid-engined Acura NSX, and it certainly didn't have the image and cult following of something like a Supra. The one thing the Stealth was better at was being a comfortable cruiser on the back roads, but this coupe is not something people buy as a grand touring vehicle, as there are way better options. Always hiding in the shadows, the Stealth made appropriate use of its name and quickly went into the dark. As for reason number 5, when compared to some of the other 90s Japanese cars, the Stealth had far more issues and problems that frustrated owners. Trouble spots included transmission issues with shifting, dashboard lights, door problems, and the 6G72 V6 engine under the hood had all types of issues, such as blowing head gaskets. Obviously, the engine and transmission caused some of the most expensive and tedious problems, so that helped to pull potential buyers away from the car. All it took for me was a quick Google search to find hundreds of owners complaining about the same issues to each other on various forums and websites. There were also some pretty serious recalls for the RT Turbo, such as the all-wheel drive transfer case leaking oil, causing bearing damage and increasing the risk of a crash. Although the poor quality certainly didn't kill the Stealth on its own, I wonder if there had been more sales, there would have been more issues reported. Either way, it wasn't as indestructible as something like the 2JZ GTE engine found in the Supra. As for the final reason, you could argue that the 3000 GT, and therefore the Stealth, was the product of the bubble economy in Japan during the 1980s. The definition of a bubble economy is a rapid escalation of market value, usually at a growth rate which is unsustainable, meaning a future crash is inevitable. But during the bubble years, corporations had tons of money and were pouring them into producing advanced sports cars such as this one. When things were no longer financially sustainable, the prices skyrocketed, and that meant higher prices in export markets like the US, hence a pretty steep price tag for the Stealth that just kept on rising in the early to mid-90s. This crash in the Japanese economy was a serious factor in the $33,000 to $38,000 US cost of the RT Turbo, which remember is equivalent to $55,000 to $67,000 in today's USD. These are nice cars, but that seemed like a really high price to pay for them, hence why sales were quite low. There were just better deals to be had out there. You could argue that this might apply to other Japanese sports cars as well, but that just means for those that really wanted a car like this, most people would have preferred to buy more of an icon, like the Supra, for a similar price tag and that has that cult following. Maybe if the cost was a little bit less, the Stealth would have been a little more popular. So to conclude, the Stealth was a domestic supercar with a high price tag that nobody bought. It brought the right parts to the table, but the execution wasn't quite right, and it was never able to make a name for itself the way that the others did, always living in their shadows. While there was early promise in 1991, the various factors that we talked about combined to stop the Stealth sooner than anticipated, gone by 1996. So that's the end of this video, guys. Thanks for watching and hopefully you enjoyed it. What do you think about the Stealth? Did you ever own one and how was your experience? And were there other reasons for this cancellation that I missed? Let me know down in the comment section below. Also, if you want to see more episodes in this series, just drop a name for which vehicle I should do next. Make sure to like and subscribe for more Mopar content, and I'll see you guys in the next video.